Do you live in Northern California? Do you live in Mendocino County, in Ukiah, in Willits, in Redwood Valley, in Kelseyville, in Rohnert Park, or anywhere within 100 miles of the North Coast wine country? Or maybe you live in Sacramento, and San Francisco, and Santa Rosa, and you felt your home shake on the morning of Wednesday, June 24th, 2026, and nobody has fully explained to you yet what you actually felt and where it came from. Then you need to watch this full video, because what happened beneath the hills of Mendocino County at 8:10 in the morning is not just a local story about a moderate earthquake and some broken shelves. It is a story about a fault system that most Californians have never heard of, that sits quietly beneath one of the most seismically complex corners of the entire United States, that just produced the largest earthquake recorded on this structure in the entire modern instrumental era, and that is directly connected to the San Andreas Fault, the fault that scientists are now warning may be more dangerous than anyone previously understood. At exactly 8:10 in the morning on June 24th, 2026, the ShakeAlert earthquake early warning system activated across Northern California. Millions of phones buzzed. My Shake apps pushed alerts that initially said the incoming earthquake would be a magnitude 6. 0. People had seconds. Some dropped and covered. Some grabbed door frames. Some just froze and held on to whatever was nearest. The actual earthquake that arrived was measured by the USGS at magnitude 5. 6 centered 11 kilometers north of Redwood Valley in Mendocino County at a depth of 8.07 kilometers. Shallow. Critically shallow. At that depth, the seismic energy has almost no rock to absorb it before it reaches people and buildings. The USGS issued a yellow pager alert and recorded a maximum shake map intensity of 7, which is classified as very strong, indicating the potential for moderate to significant damage near the epicenter. And then the aftershocks began, and they did not stop. Within the first 6 hours alone, seismologists counted at least 35 aftershocks over magnitude. 1. 3, rolling through the Maacama Fracture Zone. 6 aftershocks of magnitude 2. 5 or greater were recorded by NBC Los Angeles within the first few hours. Within 24 hours, the USGS earthquake sequence page for this event listed 99 events in the sequence. The total count of earthquakes felt and detected across the region in that 24-hour window climbed to 66 and beyond. A relentless drumbeat of tremors shaking a community that was already dealing with damaged roofs, broken water pipes, smashed merchandise in grocery stores, and power outages affecting up to 10,000 customers at peak. 66 earthquakes in 24 hours, all of them in the same fault zone. All of them in a corner of California that most people outside the region cannot place on a map. And all of them connected to one of the most seismically active and least understood fault systems in the western United States. But here's the problem. This is not just a Mendocino County story. And it is not just a story about what happened on June 24th. It is a story about what scientists are now saying is coming. And that is the part that every single person living between San Francisco and the Oregon border needs to hear. Let us start in Redwood Valley, because that is where this all began. Redwood Valley is a small community in northern Mendocino County, about 9 miles north of Ukiah, which is the county seat. The Russian River runs through this landscape. The hills are covered with oak trees and vineyards. It is wine country. It is rural Northern California at its most characteristic, the kind of community where people move to get away from the noise and density of the Bay Area or Sacramento, where families have ranches and small farms, where the mornings are quiet. On the morning of June 24th, the quiet ended at 8:10 a.m. Daniel Alonso was in Ukiah, about 9 miles from the epicenter. He described the moment on the phone to reporters. He said everything just shook. He said it was very severe, very scary. He said it felt almost like a freight train was running right through their house. He said he got almost dizzy from the shaking, that it felt like being on a roller coaster. He said he immediately called his family members to make sure they were okay, and that many of his neighbors ran outside. In Potter Valley, about 20 miles northeast of Ukiah, rancher Janet Pauley said the shaking was strong enough to knock her off balance while she was walking between buildings on her family's property. She said the giant oak trees on her ranch swayed violently. Holly Woods was in Kelseyville, about 40 miles from Ukiah, cuddling with her dogs when the earthquake hit. She said her house rock and rolled her. She said stuff flew down. She said it was very scary. A teacher at St. Mary's Catholic School in Ukiah told reporters that it was the biggest earthquake she had felt in her life, and she had lived in Ukiah for most of her 54 years. And this is where it becomes dangerous, not just in terms of immediate damage, but in terms of what this earthquake has revealed about the ground beneath your feet if you live in this part of California. At the Sinclair gas station in Willits, the power went out and items fell off the shelves. The station manager had to close. At the Safeway in Willits, employees were called out of the store to a parking lot meeting to assess conditions. Store managers stood outside their shuttered businesses looking at the damage inside. At Jalos Market in Willits, windows shattered and cleanup crews were brought in. At Testa Coffee and Wine in Redwood Valley, employees spent the morning sweeping broken glass. Kathy Boutillier, who has owned the Napa Auto Parts store in Willits for 42 years, was on her hands and knees cleaning up motor oil and other products knocked from shelves. At the Willits Senior Center, the backup generator kicked in immediately when the power failed. The executive director, Richard Baker, said the on-site thrift store was temporarily shuttered, and his team spent the morning doing damage assessment. And in Redwood Valley itself, a resident reported that their roof had caved in. PG&E confirmed that at peak, 10,000 customers were without electricity across Mendocino County. By late afternoon, that number had been reduced to approximately 4,000 Asquaxti still without power in Willits, Laytonville, Leggett, and Round Valley and Covelo. Power lines were photographed down on rural roads. PG&E crews were dispatched across the county to make repairs. The Mendocino County Emergency Operations Center opened in monitoring status. The California Governor's Office confirmed that more than 1 million Californians received the ShakeAlert warning, giving them what Governor Newsom described as vital seconds to drop, cover, and hold on. And the USGS confirmed that approximately 80,000 people experienced moderate to very strong shaking, classified at intensity levels 5 through 7th, and that around 10 million people felt weak to light shaking at intensity levels 2 through IV. 10 million people felt this earthquake. From Mendocino County, the shaking traveled south through the coast ranges and reached Sacramento 140 miles away. It reached Rohnert Park. It rattled Mendocino town on the coast. The ShakeAlert system pushed warnings to phones across a vast swath of Northern California before the surface waves arrived. The Mendocino County Executive Office confirmed that some injuries were reported, without specifying how many or how severe, but confirmed that there were no deaths. And Fort Bragg police, on the north coast about 50 miles west of the epicenter, said they were monitoring and that no damage had been reported there. Now the focus shifts to the fault itself, because the fault that ruptured on June 24th is not the fault most people expected, and the fault that actually moved has implications that go well beyond this one earthquake. When the initial reports came out on June 24th, the obvious assumption was that this was a San Andreas event. The San Andreas Fault runs through Northern California, and Mendocino County sits within its broader influence. But geologists examining the data quickly realized the earthquake's epicenter pointed to a different structure. The main shock appears to have originated on a fault strand of the Maacama Fracture Zone within Redwood Valley, near Tomke Road, and the Maacama is not a name that most people know. It should be. Geologist Lori Dengler, one of the most respected seismic hazard experts in Northern California, reviewed the event and said something that carries enormous weight. She said that since 1954, there have been approximately 17 earthquakes likely in the vicinity of the Maacama Fault in the magnitude 4 to 5. 2 range before June 24th. She said that makes the June 24th magnitude 5. 6 earthquake, the largest historic earthquake in the entire modern instrumental catalog that appears to be on that fault. The largest. In more than 70 years of seismic recording in this region, nothing on the Maacama has been this large. It is a record. And records on active fault systems are not always reassuring. Most people are missing why this matters beyond the broken glass and power outages. The Maacama Fracture Zone is not an independent fault system operating in isolation. It is described by geologists as a major player in the greater transverse San Andreas Fault System. One researcher working extensively on this structure calls it the northernmost segment of the Hayward Fault subsystem of the San Andreas Fault Zone. That connection matters enormously. The Hayward Fault runs directly through some of the most densely populated land in the United States, through Oakland, through Berkeley, beneath the stadiums and hospitals and schools of the East Bay. The Calaveras Fault, parallel to the Hayward, runs through Hollister and San Jose. These are not abstract geological features. They are fault systems whose potential for major earthquakes has been quantified, studied, and warned about for decades. And the Maacama, which runs just east of Ukiah and just west of Willits before extending through Sonoma and Mendocino counties, is part of that same family. Fault creep along the Maacama is measured at approximately 8 millimeters per year, consistent with the steady movement along the rest of the Hayward Fault System. That means this fault is not locked. It is moving, slowly, continuously, under the landscape of wine country and redwood forests, accumulating and releasing stress in ways that are mostly too small to feel, but occasionally, as on June 24th, producing ruptures large enough to shake 10 million people. And researchers studying the northern Maacama through paleoseismic trench excavations have found indications of much larger earthquakes in the system's past, with the most recent large event estimated to have occurred somewhere between 500 and 1,200 years ago, a large earthquake, on the same fault system, the last time roughly a millennium ago. And here is why this is serious in ways that this earthquake alone does not fully capture. The Maacama Fracture Zone, as its name suggests, is not a simple, clean, single fault plane. It is a splintered network of fault strands branching out at angles and running semi-parallel to the main stem of the Maacama Fault. The system is so fractured, so complex, that researchers have stated plainly that the vast majority of fault strands associated with it have yet to be identified. Clusters and swarms of small earthquakes along the fracture zone can be so numerous that they form structures called fault meshes, where interlocking fractures produce cascading sequences of micro-events. When researchers began analyzing the June 24th earthquake and its aftershock sequence in detail, they found that the epicenter fell within the tectonic transpressional foothills of the uplifting Laughlin Range, and that it may have been generated by an unmapped thrust fault. Unmapped. A fault that was not in any existing geological database contributed to producing the largest earthquake in the modern instrumental record for the system, just north of previously identified fault strands in Redwood Valley. Strands that were themselves only identified in 2021 during renewed geomorphological investigations of the area. New strands discovered in 2021, a record-breaking earthquake on an unmapped structure in 2026. The pattern here is not reassuring. This fracture zone is more active and more complex than the available maps suggest. But that is not the real story either. The real story is what a team of researchers at Oregon State University published earlier this year. And it changes the entire framework for how you need to think about earthquake risk in California. On May 2nd, 2026, just 53 days before the Redwood Valley earthquake shook 10 million people, Science Daily published the findings of a landmark study from Oregon State University marine geologist Chris Goldfinger and his international research team. The paper, published in the journal Geosphere, analyzed 3,100 years of geological history preserved in deep-sea sediment cores drilled from the ocean floor off the coasts of Oregon and Northern California. What the team was looking for were turbidites, the layers of sediment deposited by underwater landslides that are typically triggered by major earthquakes. When they compared turbidite layers from the Cascadia subduction zone and the San Andreas Fault System, they found something that the scientific community has been cautious about claiming for decades: evidence of synchronization. The two fault systems they found may be connected. An earthquake on one could trigger an earthquake on the other, within minutes or hours. Their data identified 3 separate instances within the last 1,500 years where ruptures on the Cascadia subduction zone and the northern San Andreas Fault appeared to have occurred within minutes to hours of each other, 3 times in 1,500 years, including, most recently in the year 1700, when the last known Cascadia megaquake struck the Pacific Northwest with an estimated magnitude of 9.0 and generated a tsunami that crossed the Pacific Ocean and killed people in Japan. The San Andreas, the study suggests, may have also ruptured around the same time. And what Chris Goldfinger, the lead author of this research, said about this finding is the sentence that every person in California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia needs to hear. He said, "We are used to hearing the big one, the Cascadia event, being this catastrophic huge thing. It turns out it is not the worst case scenario. Not the worst case. If the Cascadia subduction zone and the San Andreas Fault can synchronize, if a magnitude 9.0 rupture off the coasts of Oregon and Washington can trigger major earthquakes along the San Andreas simultaneously, then the disaster scenario that emergency managers in the western United States have been planning for just became significantly more complex. Instead of one catastrophic earthquake affecting one region, you would potentially have multiple major earthquakes striking multiple regions within hours of each other. San Francisco could be dealing with a major San Andreas rupture, while Portland and Seattle are simultaneously experiencing Cascadia tsunami waves. Emergency resources, which would have been stretched to their limit by a single event, would be divided across a multi-city, multi-state, simultaneous emergency. Goldfinger and his team estimated that if both faults rupture together, the disaster would draw down the resources of the entire country to respond, and would place San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver all in an emergency situation within a compressed time frame. This next part matters more than anything else in this video, because the Maacama Fracture Zone, the fault that ruptured on June 24th and sent 66 earthquakes rolling through Mendocino County in 24 hours, sits near the Mendocino Triple Junction, the point where 3 tectonic plates converge: the Pacific Plate, the North American Plate, and the Gorda Plate. The Mendocino Triple Junction is one of the most tectonically complex environments on Earth. It is the point where the San Andreas Fault System meets the Cascadia subduction zone. And a recently published research paper from January 2026 described scientists uncovering a hidden and surprisingly complex earthquake zone beneath Northern California by tracking swarms of tiny earthquakes too weak to feel. What are they calling this newly revealed zone? The zone south of Cape Mendocino, where the 2 great fault systems of the western United States converge. The zone where the Maacama sits. The zone where, on June 24th, 2026, the largest Maacama earthquake in the modern instrumental record just occurred. And here is the thing that will stay with you after this video is over. The San Andreas Fault System as a whole, including the Hayward, the Calaveras, the Maacama, and related structures, has a 75% chance of producing a magnitude 7 or larger earthquake in the next 30 years. Not 30%, 75%, 3 out of 4 chances. The San Francisco Bay region alone has about a 72% probability of at least 1 magnitude 6. 7 or larger earthquake between 2014 and 2043, according to the USGS UCRF3 forecast. USGS scenarios for a major southern San Andreas rupture involve a modeled magnitude 7. 8 event. The Hayward Fault, running directly under Oakland and Berkeley, is described as one of the most dangerous faults in the country because of the density of population sitting directly on top of it. And now, in 2026, we have 2 new pieces of information that change the risk calculus for the entire West Coast. First, the Maacama Fracture Zone, a fault system that most people have never heard of, just produced the largest earthquake in its modern recorded history, followed by 35 aftershocks in 6 hours and at least 66 individual seismic events in 24 hours. The USGS confirmed 99 events in the sequence. Second, and this is the piece that takes this from local story to something much larger, a peer-reviewed study published in the journal Geosphere just told us that the San Andreas and the Cascadia subduction zone may be able to fire together, that the big one may not be the worst case, and that the worst case may be a synchronized multi-fault catastrophe simultaneously affecting San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver. Let us go back to Redwood Valley one more time. After 8:10 a.m. on June 24th, the shaking did not stop. In Potter Valley, Janet Pauley was still dealing with the aftermath on her ranch when the first aftershock rolled through and she had to stop what she was doing and brace again. At Redwood Valley Market, owner Alex Chahada was cleaning up merchandise from the floor of his store when another tremor moved through the building and more items fell. The Safeway in Willits held its staff meeting outside, partially because of the mess inside and partially because no one wanted to be inside a building while aftershocks were still coming. At the Willits Senior Center, the backup generator was still running. Elderly residents who depended on that facility were navigating a morning of uncertainty, cleanup, and intermittent shaking, with no clear indication of when the last aftershock would arrive. The USGS physical scientist Robert Michael DeGroot was direct when he spoke to the media on June 24th. He said, "This is earthquake country." He said, "People should definitely be prepared for more shaking." With a magnitude 5, 6 mainshock, he said, "It is very normal to expect numerous aftershocks with magnitudes of up to 4. 0. That forecast has already been confirmed by the data. And aftershocks, as the USGS makes clear, can continue for days, weeks, months, and years. The June 24th earthquake has also set up a secondary hazard that will evolve over the coming months, whether or not another earthquake strikes. Shaking at intensity 7 is sufficient to dislodge hillside debris and create pre-loosened slopes that become landslide risks when heavy rainfall arrives. Mendocino County's terrain, with its steep Coast Range hillsides, its narrow valley floors, and its forest roads, is already susceptible to landslides in wet winters. Those already susceptible slopes are now more vulnerable than they were on June 23rd. When the wet season returns to Northern California later this year, the landscape beneath which 66 earthquakes occurred in 24 hours will be receiving rainfall on ground that has already been shaken loose. One more thing you need to know, the date. June 24th, 2026, was the same day that 2 magnitude 7 and 7, 5 earthquakes struck Venezuela, killing 164 people and collapsing buildings in Caracas, and a magnitude 7. 2 earthquakes struck off the coast of northern Japan. All 3 major seismic events occurred within the same afternoon window, Pacific time. Seismologists were clear that these events are not connected. Japan sits on the Pacific Ring of Fire. Venezuela sits on the Caribbean-South American plate boundary. Mendocino sits on the Pacific North American boundary near the Cascadia-San Andreas junction. 3 separate tectonic systems, 3 separate earthquake events, no causal relationship between them. But the coincidence of the timing, 3 significant earthquake events on the same calendar day in unrelated regions of the Earth, is a reminder of something that tends to get lost in ordinary daily life. The planet's tectonic systems are constantly active, constantly stressed, and capable of releasing that stress at any moment. California's earthquake risk is not theoretical. It is not a distant future scenario. It is a present-day statistical reality that geologists express as probabilities, and the probabilities for major events in the San Andreas system, in the Hayward system, in the Cascadia zone that may be synchronized with the northern San Andreas are all significant and in some cases very high. What the Maacama Fracture Zone produced on June 24, 2026 was, by the standard of California's overall seismic catalog, a moderate event, magnitude 5, 6, the largest in modern instrumental records for this specific fault, but small compared to the scale of what the San Andreas, the Hayward, or the Cascadia are capable of generating. The broken windows in Willits are being replaced. The power has been mostly restored to Mendocino County. The Safeway is open again. Alex Chahada has cleaned up his market. PG&E crews have left the field. And the aftershock sequence is slowly, gradually decaying, each new tremor a little smaller than the one before. The fault settling back into whatever passes for rest in a system that moves at 6 to 9 millimeters per year and has been doing so for millions of years. But the 99 events in the USGS sequence catalog for June 24th, 2026 are not just data points. They are a reminder from the Maacama Fracture Zone that the fault systems of Northern California are active right now, tonight, releasing stress in ways that most residents never notice. The research from Oregon State University, published 53 days before this earthquake, tells us that the stress in these systems is connected across distances that most of us would never intuitively link together. The Mendocino Triple Junction, where the Pacific Plate and the North American Plate and the Gorda Plate meet in one of the most complex tectonic environments on the planet, sits just a few tens of miles from where the June 24 sequence began. The ShakeAlert system worked. The warning went out. 1 million people got the notification. Some of them had seconds to prepare. And the fact that there were injuries but no deaths from this earthquake, the largest in the Maacama's modern history, is at least partly a testament to that system doing exactly what it was built to do. But the system was built for what already happened. What researchers are now telling us in the pages of Geosphere and in the seismological journals and in the ongoing analysis of the Maacama's newly discovered unmapped fault strands is that the next event in this region may not fit neatly inside the scenarios already planned for. The fault that moved on June 24th was unmapped before it moved. The connection between Cascadia and the San Andreas was hypothesized for decades before it was documented in sediment cores representing 3,100 years of geological history. The seismic landscape of Northern California is more complex, more connected, and more capable than the existing maps fully show. The aftershocks in Mendocino County are still coming, smaller now, quieter, but the fault has not finished talking.